Welcome to the Hot Ticket Podcast. This is episode 211. On this episode, well, this is another hashtag cancel this. This time, we discuss everything we hate about cigar influencers. There's a lot to discuss on this topic, so this is actually going to be part one of part two. And in this time, we have our buddy Alex from My Cigar Pack on the episode to have a discussion with us surrounding this subject. So let's waste no more time. Let's get into it.
One thing I do want to say is I want to make you all aware of the sensitivity of the subject today, okay? It's just be aware of what this implies on my end. So if there are brief moments that I hold my poise and I do not respond in a mocking fashion, it's purely diplomatic and political, okay?
Listen, Alex. So I've thought about this a lot as to not put you in a precarious position. So typically what we would do in these segments is list off essentially 5 things, right? This is our hashtag cancel this. It's 5 things that irritate us about a specific subject. But I'm doing something a bit different and I'm being more diplomatic in this particular approach on this subject because I think it warrants it. Not because I don't want to go hard in the paint. It's because I think it warrants a more sophisticated conversation, which I think will be in good alignment with dialogue between you and us. So I've thought about this a lot. I took 2 really long walks today and I go, do I want to go hard in the paint at this and really fucking disrupt some stuff? Because I'm typically that would be the way my brain goes. I said, or do I really want to have like the most meaningful conversation I can have? And that's kind of what I decided on. So
and you got that, and you got that white flag on your messages, which is important.
Dude, multiple times.
Okay. Hey, so I got to run from here because this guy's got to go somewhere, but he wants to say hi.
Who's this guy?
I actually asked him to say hi. What?
Who's this guy?
This guy, you're going to see him now. And I think he'd be an interesting guest if he ever has time. You know,
it's Sinbad.
Is he Spanish?
It's yeah, he is. All right. Let me put him on for a second.
Oh,
What's up?
That is awesome. Yes. Robert Caldwell. Sweet. Hey, by the way, I saw you on a plane one time. It was really weird.
We totally did.
So you know what's weird is every once in a while, like I'll get on a plane and I'll see a dude with like a tatuaje hat, and I'm like, I just fucking look at the floor. That shit happens. It doesn't happen a lot, but I mean it happens often enough. Like every 5th flight, there's like a dude with like a cigar merch shirt or hat on, and then I get on and I'm like,
yeah, you're like, ah, shit.
I like walk through it like this. It's normally a heavy guy. That's like one of those guys. And then the other thing, like if I go on vacation somewhere and I see a cigar shop, like I have like a 6th sense for knowing that there's one, I'll cross the fucking street and like walk down the other side of the street looking the other way. Just to not fuck up my day.
Now here's the sad reality of when I saw you on a flight, because you were sitting first class, and actually Chris and I were flying to the Dominican, and you were sitting up first class, and you can't miss you because you're a tall dude. And I wasn't an asshole, but when I got to my seat, we were probably 7 rows behind you, and I was like, Robert Caldwell, and you never even fucking turned around. And then I think
I might have not heard you.
You probably didn't, but then literally I took a picture of the back of your head and then tagged it in Instagram, and I was like, that guy right there is Robert Caldwell.
That's awesome.
It made me feel good at the time, but.
That's awesome.
Well, dude, it was good to see you. I know you got a jet, but that's awesome.
Yeah, man. You guys got to have me on your show.
100%. I'd be down for that anytime.
Send
literally
me a message
anytime.
and start it up.
I definitely will. And actually, you know what? You could, if you didn't have an appointment, like we didn't really want to talk to Alex. So, I mean, if you want to hang around for a bit, we can just tell him to jet if you'd like.
I would, man. I'm stuck. So I gotta go. But yeah, send me a message and let's do it for sure.
Absolutely. We definitely will.
Perfect. All right, I'm gonna turn you back over to Alex now.
All right, my man. Good seeing you.
All right, thanks, man.
Good to see you.
Boring guy's on now.
You lucky duck.
Wait. Let me pick things up. I'll go in the car. No. Yeah.
I mean, that was better than Sinbad, but I really wanted to see Sinbad.
Yeah. You know, Sinbad's broke as a joke.
Here?
Probably.
Do you know that,
I'll
Chris?
hop into my car, turn off the Wi-Fi. Just give me like
Dude, listen, you're fine.
Keep
We're
talking,
gonna keep talking
but if
without you.
like a little.
I love
Right,
I love how like you know, I always fuck with my employees on Zoom because they'll be in the middle of having a conversation, Chris, and I'll just go like this.
Thank you, bro.
Or I'll do one of the where your face is like this. You're like,
Yeah.
and they're like, Corey, are you
definitely-
frozen? And I just stand there for like 30 seconds. And they're like, you frozen? I'm like, no, I've been here the whole time.
It's like, Tom, you will not believe.
Oh, that's fucking fantastic. Hey, that was a good treat, man.
was a
you know
good
what's
treat.
you know what's kind of funny is like I admire that guy so much, and I don't really say that often, but I've always said like if there's one person I like could really meet that's been in the cigar industry for a long time, it's just a wealth of knowledge. It's like it'd be Robert Caldwell for sure.
Yeah. And he has such a prestigious name. He sounds like a lord or some type of baron.
Sir Robert.
Sir Robert Caldwell.
And super cool dude as well. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could tell. It was pretty fucking awesome. That was cool. So, Alex, I promise you, my man, you know, I said before, I won't make this controversial for you. This is kind of you know what I honestly think this is going to be, Alex, and I hope you can still hear us since you're off video. I hope what this can be is a part one of probably a 2-part episode, because I think there's more than enough to discuss. I think there's more than enough topically to really get into here. But what I wanted to do, and again, hopefully Alex can hear us. He's not saying anything. Bark twice if you're in Milwaukee. Nope, definitely not. He probably can hear us, but I don't know if he can speak to us.
That's fine.
It's
It's kind of
technology.
like our normal audience. You know, they really can't talk back, but we can just talk to them.
We can just talk to them. Now, Chris, I wanted to do this, and we'll begin with this. So there's 2 definitions that I really want to go over, and I think this will help kind of curtail the conversation about this. And this is just to expose the episode. The topic of the episode is hashtag cancel this, right? Everything we hate about cigar influencers. Not 5 things, everything. Now, here's how I want to begin the episode. And Alex dropped off, but he'll be back on. Here's how I want to begin the episode.
Okay.
Influencer definitionally is a person or thing that influences another, which is a pretty broad-based and somewhat vague definition. But what we're talking about in terms of the cigar industry, we're really talking about more of the social or digital influencer, right? And that is a user who has established credibility in a specific industry, has access to a huge audience, and is able to persuade others based upon their recommendations. So really, from a social perspective, that's topically what we're really going to get into here. And I think there's enough meat on the bone, again, to make this kind of a 2-part effort. I really think we could probably spend hours on this subject. And of course, I am very curious in terms of, and he's coming back on, I'm very curious of Alex's perspective on this as somebody who owns and operates a company. There he is. Are you I-95 in it? What's up, buddy? Hey, eyes on the road, motherfucker.
Dude, I have my eyes on the road.
So Alex, what I was doing was I was just kind of introducing the subjects at hand here. And I told Chris, like, this could really be, this could be an extended conversation. I just went through the definition of what influencer is according to Webster. And then of course the digital and social aspect of what influencing is, as it would potentially relate to the cigar industry, which is something that topically I think we can spend a ton of time on. Also, I think it's advantageous for Chris and I to get your perspective on this as well. And it looks like you kind of froze again, or you're doing what Chris does and just magically freezes up. So with that,
I'm just nodding.
Okay. So what I wanted to do was kind of start it off like this, more broad base. So I had this conversation. You remember that Clubhouse app that everybody was, and I'm pretty sure the fucking owner of like Clubhouse runs like a pedophile ring or something like that, and that's the reason it's no longer. Now listen, that's a speculation, but that's what I heard. So whether or not I know it's true, I'm not accusing. This is not an accusatory thing. It's just what I heard. But that whole fucking bullshit came and went pretty fast. But anyway, I was on the Clubhouse app and I was part of this extended conversation that centered around what influence is in the cigar industry. And there's a few people, and they'll remain nameless, and it's not because they said anything wrong or damning. It's just for the sake of conversation, depending on what people's beliefs are and where their thoughts lie in terms of what is influential in the cigar industry. I just want to name names. But the conversation was really centered around a couple organizations over in Europe who would use and or task certain folks, influencers, if you will, definitionally, I guess, on like Instagram and social media to broadcast and support and or influence around their products. And then the conversation went kind of deep in terms of like, well, what is the return of that effort? Did you get what you want? Was there sustainability? And it seemed like the answers were a bit mixed. And then there was another particular person who I admire in the industry greatly that said, well, what does it do from a long-term perspective? Like, and what do you have as a brand that has to support that effort? Like, meaning that you could pay someone, right? Someone could pay me, and it's happened. You could pay me money, and because of my following, I can sit there and say, this product's great, make sure you get your hands on this, and so on and so forth. But it may not be a great product. So I oftentimes think about the sustainability of that effort and what that does from a long-term perspective. Typically, and I mean that more based on like cigar manufacturers or brands. And Alex, I do want to take some time to talk about just even what you do with My Cigar Pack and kind of interrelated to some of the competitors that you have out there too. And this is not, I'm saying it right now, not a bash fest or anything like that. It's not that. I want to get an understanding of like really what works and what doesn't, what's meaningful, what's not, what's the progression, where do we see it going? Is there the same level of influence? Like what do you definitionally think influence is? There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to kind of unpack in this conversation. But really what I wanted to do was kind of center around, and this is the first topic, who in the cigar industry is influential? Because I was thinking about this earlier on my walk, and here's what came to my mind. Brand owners, super influential, right? If we're simply talking about influence, brand owners, you have people who work in publications, you have expert consumers, you have podcasters and other mediums, right? For media, there's a level of influence kind of spun or webbed around all those things. So you have, minus the social aspect of it, or if you are on Instagram and your header says influencer, and it could be defined in whatever way you want to define that. But there are multiple levels of influence in the cigar industry, right? So who influences what? Like, Alex, who do you feel to you is influential in the cigar industry? Like, if you were to say off the top of your head, these are the people, here's the folks, a particular individual I think is very influential in the cigar industry, and why that person? Like, what do they bring to the table in terms of those things?
No, I mean, this is going to sound like BS, but I think honestly the most influential element or component, if you take all that, that nucleus of different, elements of what an who influences, I would have to say the most influential is the consumer. At the end of the day, it's got to be the consumer. It's got to be that mouth to mouth, that reputable, conversation, that true and authentic. I paid for it and I'm repping it because I like it. Where whoever's untied, whether they were originally poised as an end consumer or not, but whoever organically paid for the product and liked it, or in a negative case disliked it, is the most influential to me. to be honest, if I had the chance to talk with different people, I'm pretty sure I could convince, you know, in a hypothetical, obviously you're mentioning like hypothetical scenarios. I believe that I could convince a lot of people that, say, my cigar pack is a better program within the realm of, you know, some of its competitors. Even though those sub to, dude, I'm being super direct and super honest with, you know, with how I feel the influence goes as far as you know, the effect. I think all of those angles that you pointed out are relevant in the sense that there's a lot of influencing channels, you know. I don't know if I answered the question correctly, but I believe the end consumer is the most influential because it's the biggest, it's the largest.
Yeah, I don't think there's to me there's not a correct answer. It's kind of what you said. What are the angles, right? Where is influence derived from? Before you hopped back on, I just kind of quickly went over the definition of influence as Webster would define it, and then social influence as it's defined. Two drastically different things, obviously, definitionally. So I do agree with you in terms of like the element of the consumer, right? Like, and it's kind of one of those things. It's and to the good and to the bad, as you've already said. It's almost like you get your car worked on and you have a great experience. You may tell 5 or 6 people that go and they get their car worked on, and another 5 or 6 people, another 5 or 6 people, all great experiences, and it kind of blossoms and blooms from there. A lot of businesses are growing organically in that manner. So the power of the consumer influence is great, to the good and to the bad. But let's recognize something in the cigar industry alone, which is the element of being paid to influence. I think that's something that everybody knows, doesn't really discuss to a high degree. And one of the things I've noticed is like, and let me put it this way, and then this is, we're going to get on the topic of how it relates from a gender perspective, and I think we have to do that. But right now, just as a whole, overarching, there are people within the social media realm, specifically interrelated to the cigar industry, that may have large followings. I think that is probably the number one. Like, what kind of statistics can you put out from your posts? Like, what's your following? How many likes, how many comments, and then there's the back end stuff in terms of reach and impressions and so on, different shares. And I think all of that is interrelated to somebody who owns and operates a brand, or it could be anything. Like, again, going back to what you do in My Cigar Pack, right? Anything interrelated to cigars where you're selling, producing, you provide a product or a service, you could essentially pay for somebody to help represent your brand. But I'm wondering how effective that is. I've never heard anyone talk about how effective it is, because I don't know that there's brands that love to admit what they're doing tactically and even strategically in terms of those things. Like, I've not had that conversation where someone goes, yeah, my return on investment, trackable return on investment is this from this particular endeavor. Here's my budget. Here's my marketing spend in terms of these things. Here's what I got in return. Like, those are conversations that never occur. But I'm curious. I am curious. I have a heightened sense of curiosity as far as what does that look like? And what is the sustainability of it? Do you come back to that person and do something else? Is there round 2, round 3, round 4? Chris, you have something to say. Go for it.
I think this is a great subject, Corey, and I will try to be as tame as I can be with these answers, but still using my analogies that are incomprehensible. It's kind of like the used car lot that has those fucking wavy, like, fucking balloon things, you know? And it's enough to grab your attention, right? It's enough to grab your attention. But are you going to go to that dumpy used car lot and buy a car that you're not even really interested in buying? Or those guys outside of a Dollar General who are flipping signs? Yeah, sure, it looks flashy. Guy's got some mad skill flipping that little wood board around. And he's got your attention. But are you going to go into that Dollar General and start buying products, it may be enough. It may be enough to get you to pull off to the side of the road, find a nearest parking lot, and walk into the store. But it never guarantees you're ever going to commit to buying. It's just a looker. It's just to grab your attention. That's it.
But are there some people, and this is kind of the path that I want to go down. I think there's an element of the flash, right? No pun intended. There's an element of the flash, and there's an aesthetic, there's an appearance. This person garners a lot of attention. And then I think you have another part of it, and that's a knowledge-based perspective. Like, who knows what? Is the influence derived from knowledge and background and being exposed to this world for a long period of time and through information and education? Or is the influence from flash? And which one is, because in this conversation I had in Clubhouse, someone suggested on there that when they pay for somebody to represent their brand in social posts, that the return is typically pretty good in terms of what they said, although numbers weren't shared. That it ends up being a net positive for them.
So that's more like the guy that's carrying the big wooden cross at the corner of a downtown city street, praising Jesus in the coming apocalypse, and that you must join Christianity so that you may be saved before the apocalypse comes. I get that. That can be very powerful. I get that.
Yeah, so Alex, the other day, one of the things that had come up that I saw, and I'm not going to, again, I'm trying my best not to name names. It would be a competitor of yours. And there was a post that went out, and it was very clear in what the post was that it was a paid post, that it was a sponsored post, and it was essentially to garner some attention around the product of a My Cigar Pack competitor. Now, this is a competitor of yours that I actually know fairly well. And when I look at the product being delivered to the marketplace, to me personally, it's subpar. So that's where I talk about like sustainability. Maybe it gains some exposure. Maybe it's the Trojan horse. But what does it do from a long-term perspective? Does it do anything? You know, because I kind of look at it and I go, I think about this just with brands, right? You could market the hell out of a cigar, and you could pay for someone to market your cigar for you and push out social posts and so on. But if you're making a shit cigar, the consumer is going to be aware of that very quickly. And so what happens in those cases?
Just part of the market is going to be aware of that. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Just part of the market. There's a really big new coming audience that, you know, can't really know the difference between, you know, apples and oranges. But, you know, it may again sound like BS, but I take pride in being very organic with the growing process. So I wouldn't be the best person to give you a concrete answer on the long-term impact on, you know, a deliverable on a payment, you know, like what is the deliverable in this case?
Right.
Loyalty, retention, you know, reputation, brand awareness. But we get that. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
We get that from, you know, with time. And again, I'm not the best suited to do that because we try to really grow organically. In sense of the knowledge base behind these paid medias, let's call it that. It's very I keep saying it's very relative, just because it seems like every day there's a new expert, there's a new source that has read every book. I mean, there's guys out there, and I'm not naming anybody, and I'm not trying to point fingers, but there's guys that are claiming. They're literally getting on videos and they're claiming to be experts. They're saying they know what's going on and they have a certain validity, but these are guys that have never stepped foot on a farm. And that, for example, on my case, that doesn't make me smarter in an objective perspective to what I'm trying to sell or I'm trying to cater to the product. But if you're trying to be, you know, objective to the to the science itself, to the knowledge, to the real knowledge base in this industry, which is experience, obviously, because every product is completely different. I mean, there's a lot of things that are pretty, unarguable. They're pretty standard. But in most part, there's a lot of relativity is what I'm trying to say. There's use middle lane and turn left. Right, I gotta turn. I'm trying to read the dude. I have no idea where I am right now, because Robert lives super far from me, so I have no idea where I am right now. But I was trying to stay online with the point that there's a lot of relativity in the knowledge that a lot of people have or claim to have. So it's kind of tricky to know what is truly impactful versus what is actually legitimate.
Right.
And creates impact because it's legitimate, not just because it's flashy, going back to Chris's example.
Do you think though, do you have a feeling, knowing what you know, this may not be a question you want to answer, is there a heightened, maybe, how do I want to put this? There's an element of increased exposure around certain things because there's an aesthetic, or what do you think is more influential in terms of like knowledge base? Because I think two of those in some instances have been blended very well together in certain people that I know in the industry, where there's the element of appearance and aesthetic, and then there's the element of knowledge, and both are representing that person simultaneously. And there, I think there's a high level of influence.
I think there's an interesting combination, but you would have to like break it down case by case, because I'm going to go ahead, and you're going to like this. This is going to be spicy. I'm going to point out, and I'm not going to point out a competitor. I'm going to point out a media outlet that has been around for years, and probably the website hasn't changed in 20 years, which is William Cooper, Cigar Coop. Coop is regarded as one of the most reputable, media outlets with Cigar Coop in the industry. His website, his aesthetic, there's no aesthetic. I mean, his website looks like it hasn't been updated in 20 years. Yeah. So, that's a guy that has a lot of experience, a lot of, he's endured a lot. He's been around for 30, 40 years in the industry. He's been around for the three booms. Right. And he gets a lot of credibility because of it. But maybe a newcomer would be attracted to, let's use you guys for example. I don't want to point out to other people. You guys have an amazing website, right? You're not using it like you were before, but maybe a newcomer that hasn't been around, that has no idea who Coop is probably going to to be more inclined to read your stuff before they know what the content is, just because of the aesthetic, right? You make it very pleasing. You break it down. It's a modern website. It's a good perspective, I mean, titles, whatever. I'm again, not content. Before we get into the content, like Cigar Coop, Hot Ticket Weekly, let's say that hypothetically you're ranking the SEO, they're right next to each other. You open both tabs. Which one do you stay in? All right. If you're an old guy, if you've been around for a while, you're probably going to read Coop first. Yeah. But if you're a new guy, I'm going to make the bold statement that it's going to be like a 90-10, you guys. Right. So I think aesthetics matters in some cases. And I think it's really just got to be broken down by case. But at the end of the day, if you're consistent, if you're objective with if you're true to your fashion, if you're true to your modus operandi, I think that's when it's going to build the loyalty from the reader to the knowledge base, right? Because at the end of the day, people are going to eventually be a lot of people. All right, who do I want to stick with?
Yeah, and so that's I think
that was my answer.
No, I think that's, so to me that's really good, because I did want to talk about, there's a media aspect to it, right? And I was thinking even earlier, again, I took Dude, I took like an obnoxiously long walk just to think of these things through because I couldn't do it just sitting down at my desk. I'm like, I needed to just like get out and think about it. And I thought about the media aspect. Like you mentioned Coop, right? Old school, been doing it for a long time, recognized as someone who really knows their shit. Although aesthetically, both in website and in person, he definitely looks like Humpty Dumpty, and Chris and I do not. So there's that piece of it. Although I really actually like Coop a lot, so I just had to say it.
Yeah, me too.
And I admire and respect. I love listening to him, and I love reading all of his stuff. But I think you also have to, inclusive of that, think about somebody like a Cigar Aficionado or a Half Wheel, or even some of the publications like Cigar Journal and so on. Like, what is the level of influence there? I think like the attention around something like Cigar Aficionado, I think would be not the same as Coop, but similar in terms of like the age range, right? It's probably a lot of old school guys like to sit down in a magazine, flip some pages and so on. And what's the level of influence that exists with something like Cigar Aficionado? And what is the long-term sustainability of that kind of publication? Like, does that ever get to a point where it dies off and it no longer makes sense? I've thought about that before, and I'm not saying like Cigar Aficionado is going to die off, and it could be long lasting and go on forever and continue to build and grow and so on. But like, do those things change as a result of, new generational sweeps, the industry as a whole, new medians like podcast platforms? Does that erode some of the stuff? And you can't argue, Cigar Aficionado has been insanely influential to the cigar industry for a period of time. I would argue is one of the reasons the cigar industry is as big as it is today. So what happens with a publication like that and other publications that are like that?
Can we get it in an Audible book?
I read a cigar cigar book. I listened to it. I hate when people say, "Oh, I read a book," and then I'm like, "Oh, what book did you read?" And they're like, "Oh, it was like such and such on Audible." I was like, "Well, then you didn't read it. You listened to it." I always say I listened to a book because it's like I don't even want to challenge the thought process of me actually reading something. But I listened to a cigar book, and it was interesting. I kind of digested a little bit of it to Chris yesterday, actually, or 2 days ago when he was over. But I think about the publication like Cigar Aficionado. Do you think that there's sustainability in that model, Alex, long term? Because they really haven't deviated from what they've done for a long time, like really at all. Even their website is kind of like, meh. It's the very so-so website, and they really live by that publication.
They've amassed such a bit, for the in terms of, what media, the media target is. And that's still a demographic that's going to live on for a couple more decades, strong as they are, without really modifying too much their structure. But I mean, you start to see it for the first time ever. You go on starting this year. I mean, actually last year, 2020. You went on Cigar Aficionado, and for the first time, you start seeing ads, like ads for online retailers for the first time ever.
Right.
And, I think that may be a first, sight of how things are going to turn into in the next couple of years. I mean, they had a very strong, long-lasting policy that of, not working with any online retailer. And now they started doing it. They started, the Cigar Yard was the first online ad ever, January of 2020. So you see how they have to slowly, start shifting. I mean, they have a big power with Cigar Insider. You don't see that on the website, but Cigar Insider is massive.
Right.
And they have arguably one of the largest databases for the consumer base and for the market share. So they have the Insider app, the Insider subscription, which is separate from whatever Cigar Aficionado is. I believe that obviously that has to be, slowly shifting. But again, if you go back to understanding that we represent, and by we, I mean you two and myself, we represent a certain type of listener base and reader base that is, that just crosses over very mildly with what Cigar Aficionado does in their efforts, but there's still a large chunk of that demographic that represents a strong, purchasing power in the industry, and they're going to be around for a little while. So they should slowly start to shift to different things, but it's like, what are you going to do? Are you going to have just like Gordon Mott do a podcast?
Right.
I mean, he probably should, but is his money worth more on his time equals money? Is his money worth more on a podcast versus like editing the magazine, which I believe is not as strong as it used to be before, but it's still probably a very strong force in the industry and in the market share. So
right.
There's two angles, right? It's a very interesting question, and I like the focus on Cigar Aficionado just because they're the largest. They're massive. They've been around the longest. They clearly changed the game, and they created a market, a large market for the media. I mean, there's guys that's starting podcasts today. There's guys that's starting podcasts every day and writing articles and copywriting for different publications. I mean, look at Tobacco Magazine, Tobacco Business, which we were very honored to be part of an article of in the last issue. I mean, their strong suit now is their online magazine.
Right.
So, I mean, you see people drifting and changing, but how impactful is that going to be? Related to the question that you're asking, well, it's yet to be seen, man. There's two angles.
Yeah, I think about the demographic too. Not even so much the median, but the demographic. Like Cigar Aficionado, I would assume, I'm making assumptions here. I don't know for sure, but I highly doubt there's too many people that are around our age or younger that subscribe to the publication of Cigar Aficionado, meaning that the magazine shows up at their doorstep every single month. I suspect that's not the case. Demographically, I would say probably somewhere 45 age range and up, probably even to like 70-year-olds. I think is probably like their biggest demographic for the publication itself. So I often wonder, and we've talked about this before, ushering a new generation of cigar smokers. And this is an interesting statistic. I told Chris this the other day. And you, Alex, you may have heard of the name before. Huge bourbon connoisseur, and who I would consider very influential in the bourbon space, probably the most influential. His name's Fred Minnick. Fred Minnick, as it relates to bourbon, he actually showed a statistic, and it was, I forget what the sample size was, but it was essentially a demographic of people who preferred bourbon over other said liquors, right? Like bourbon is their highest preference. And surprisingly to me, 82% represented demographic was millennials. And I was like, holy shit. Like, wow. I thought for sure it would be a higher age range. So I wonder if there is some sort of correlation to that, even with cigars, because I think it's that leisure aspect. So I make this connection to younger generations, even millennial generations, because cigars and bourbon aren't cheap, as I think the millennial generation is deeply embedded into their careers, starting to make money, but also recognizing that relaxation and leisure is a wonderful spice of life. That does there a correlation with like cigars? And then how is that represented in with some of these publications? And I think about someone like Half Wheel that I think is like somewhere in between Cigar Aficionado and then just, I don't even know. I think they're more, obviously it's an online presence, but they would probably, in terms of the biggest represented like online besides Cigar Aficionado, everybody knows Half Wheel. And to a degree where it's like Half Wheel covers everything. They don't miss anything. Yep. They cover literally everything. I don't even know how the fuck they do it. It's like the shit that they fucking uncover. It's like, how much time in a day do you have to publish all this shit? It's just dumbfounding to me. But like, what about the level of influence of someone like a Half Wheel who has a very strong online presence, but does it create some sort of correlation and what's the generational impact of them? And even around the expertise, there's essentially three main guys that work in Half Wheel that do pretty much all the writing and editing. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's three. It's like, what kind of level of influence do they have? And how does that kind of correlate to Cigar Aficionado? Is it like Half Wheel's eating the lunch of Cigar Aficionado day in and day out? Or do they kind of have this own lane that they kind of stay in, and that's where they're going to kind of operate for an extended period of time?
I mean, well, it depends how you measure it. I mean, if you're measuring it on clicks, there's just a massive crossover. If you're measuring on content, there's very little crossover. I mean, every now and then you'll have Half Wheel release like the new, C Series E, right? So John has a good relationship with Cigar Aficionado, I believe, because they cover his stuff because, there's reasons behind it. So there's reasons why there would be some coverage behind that. And then there's that particular news on that product. But then again, there's 20 product releases on that week that are not going on Cigar Aficionado, but they are going on Half Wheel. So, Half Wheel has all this industry related, strictly like within the industry related news. Like, if it's not like a big legal FDA, whatever news, Cigar Aficionado won't write about it. They'll write something like, FDA grants 3-year period for substantial equivalence reports, whatever. That's big. So they'll cover that. But then again, they won't cover something like FDA delays testing for 2 weeks in Arizona's new lab, whatever. I'm just making random stuff up. If it's not impactful, they're not going to cover it, right? So there's a lot of crossover in terms of clicks, in terms of hits, in terms of certain demographics and certain measuring widgets, call it this. But in terms of